accepted to share his expertise on large language model because he has a lot of experience in terms of language technology on different projects in which he has been part of. And just to share a little about Mr. Yurik, it's important to know that Mr. Yurik is not in the language industry by accident, because actually, you know, he has a master's degree in translation and a postgraduate certificate in specialized translation from the Faculty of Art in Belgium, which means that he might also be fluent in French. And aside Dutch, which is his mother tongue, Mr. Yurik speaks English, French, Spanish, and basic Portuguese. He's multilingual, as we can clearly see. He's passionate about Spain and Latin America. And after some experience with Yamagata, Europe, he continued with his career, where in 2018, you know, he worked at the university. Since 2018, he worked at the University of Antwerp as a lecturer of the module Introduction to Localization in the Translation and Interpreting Master. And he really enjoys teaching the translation topic, and he also does guest lecturing at some universities of Antwerp and Ghent in Belgium, if I get it correctly. And he's also a frequent speaker at industry events such as Memo Q Fest, TECOM, and KU Living Translation Technology Summer School. So this just to share that the person we have today is someone who is familiar with the language industry, who has been actively working on different projects where language technology were involved. And we are privileged to have him today to share with us what are some of the opportunities, what are some of the potential that we can get when it has to do with large language model and being integrated, you know, in the language service industry, and the possibilities that we can tap or leverage through that. So thank you so much, Yurik, and welcome again.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So with no further transition, we will kindly request Mr. Yurik to share with us, you know, a brief, you know, state of the art when it has to do with large language model integration in the language service industry. We kindly encourage everyone to be attentive, and just after the presentation, your questions will be taken. During the presentation, you can also share your question in the chat box, and any other consideration which you want to verbalize will be shared directly after the presentation. So Mr. Yurik, you have the floor to share with us the beautiful experiences that you have gathered so far over the years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I will share my screen and launch the presentation. Quick confirmation, please, that you're able to see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Yes, please, we can see it.
Thank you very much. Then here we go.
Yes.
First of all, I would like to say thank you to the organizers for having me on the event today. I really appreciate it, and it's always a pleasure to be invited to talk about this very interesting topic. I think it's something that interests us as language industry professionals, and I'm happy to share my expertise, and hopefully I can meet the expectations and answer all of your questions. I have put together a couple of slides for you, and I'm happy to talk you through them. The presentation is basically a build-up of two parts. In the first part, I will explain how those AI models actually work. I think it's very important to know that if we want to have a proper conversation about artificial intelligence. It's a little bit technical, so I already apologize for that, but I will try my very, very best to explain it as clearly and in an understandable way as possible. The second part is more centered around use cases. How can we leverage large language models in our daily operations? What is happening in the industry? What is our industry doing? And which impact does it have on the competitive landscape between language technology providers, but also between language service providers? That being said, here we go. So the first thing that you need to know is that when it comes to artificial intelligence, our industry has come a very long way. And the first noteworthy AI initiative in our industry was rule-based machine translation. I don't know if anyone in the room has experienced or has experience with rule-based machine translation. I have. It was very interesting. How did it work? The model, the algorithm would look at a source sentence, an input sentence, and it would try to assign a grammatical category to every individual word in the input. Article, noun, verb, article, noun. In the case of the sentence, a girl eats an apple. And then it would very simply try to produce a translation based on grammatical rules. If I have an article in this language, I need to translate it as such in the target language. That's how it worked. It was very clumsy. Again, if you have experience with it, you will acknowledge that it was very clumsy. It was not very fluent, and it did not work very well for certain languages, Asian languages, right to left languages, for example. But important to note, it was very, very accurate. So it was a very good first experience for us as an industry with artificial intelligence. Today, the state-of-the-art technology for AI, it's not rule-based algorithms anymore. Today, it's neural networks. What do you need to know about neural networks? They don't have anything to do with language anymore. Neural networks are purely based on computer science or data science. I have an image on the slide of a neural network. Let me try to explain how it works. In the case of neural machine translation, the model, the actual neural model, is called a sequence-to-sequence model. And a sequence-to-sequence model consists of two parts, an encoder and a decoder. Encoder on the left, decoder on the right. The encoder starts the process, looks at your input sentence at a text string, and converts every individual word in the input string into a number. And we call those numbers vectors or embeddings. And those numbers typically are 000, 010, 001, 100, etc., and so on. Then the model will try to analyze the relationship between the different embeddings in the input. And it does this analysis based on the training data it has seen. So in the end, you end up with a sequence of embeddings, and that sequence of embeddings establishes the context and the meaning of the input. Then the decoder takes over, and the decoder starts producing a translation for the input sentence based on the context and the meaning of the input, and also based on the patterns it has learned in the training data it has seen. Very important, it will produce a translation by continuously predicting the next best word in the output. And this is very important because this is what we call generative AI. So there's a lot of talk and a lot of conversation about generative AI. What is generative AI? The ability to continuously predict the next best word in the output. That's generative AI, nothing more, nothing less. Something else I need to add to this is that between the encoder and the decoder, or the input layer and the output layer, there are more connections, there are more layers in between. And basically, what a layer does is adding an extra step of analyzing the relationship between the different embeddings in the input. Why is this important? Because once you have 2 or 3 or more layers between the input and the output, we talk about a deep learning neural network. That's a deep learning neural network. Also important to note, in the case of a neural machine translation model, there typically are hundreds of extra layers between the input and the output. That's deep learning, that's a deep learning neural network, and that's generative AI. Now, I would like to quote this very nice gentleman on the slide, Mr. Firth, who said in 1957 that you shall know a word by the company it keeps, which brings me to the concept of attention. And attention basically means that when the neural network analyzes the relationship between the different embeddings in the input, It will try to determine which words are really important in the input, which words have a stronger impact on the meaning of the source, and which words have a stronger impact to produce a very good, accurate output. It's because of the concept of attention that in the case of a sentence like, the animal didn't cross the street because it was too tired, the model knows that the word it refers to the animal. Whereas in the sentence, the animal didn't cross the street because it was too wide, the model will know, because of the concept of attention, that the word it refers to the street. Now, this is very important, and the title of this slide, Attention is All You Need, sounds a little bit catchy, but it's not a coincidence. Why? And now we're ending up, or now we're coming to the topic of today, the large language models, the LLMs. In the case of large language models, the model, the foundational model, is not called a sequence-to-sequence model, as in the case of neural machine translation. In the case of large language models, the underlying model is called a transformer or a transformer model, right? And the transformer model has established itself as the new standard, the new default for deep learning neural networks. What do you need to know about transformers? The concept of the transformer model was introduced by Google in a research paper published in 2017. And the title of that presentation, or the title of that paper, sorry, was Attention is All You Need. Also interesting, Google released the transformer model specifically for machine translation purposes. So all the nice things that you can do in ChatGPT today, that was unanticipated. That's also interesting to know. Okay, again, a little bit of technical input now. What does the transformer model do? The transformer model also applies the concept of attention, but takes it to the next level, and we call what a transformer model does self-attention. What does that mean? Whenever a transformer model receives an input, sentence, a text string, it will automatically compute attention scores for every word in the input with respect to every other word in the input. And it will do that dynamically at the same time for every individual word in the input. After doing that, it will create new embeddings for every word in the input, taking into account the attention scores of the other word. And it repeats this process 4, 5, 6 times, the amount of times that's necessary to come to the proper analysis of the input sentence. Again, this was a lot of technical explanations. I apologize for that. No more technical stuff, I promise. What do you need to know? What are the true advantages of this approach of working with transformer models? First of all, high accuracy. Transformer models are capable of capturing long-range dependencies and relationships between every single word in an input sequence. Imagine you have an input of thousands of words, 5,000 words, for example. The model will understand the finest relationship between the very first word in the input and the very last word in the input. That's number one. Number two, computational performance. A large language model can digest a lot more training data at a faster pace. So you could say that transformer models are more intelligent than the previous generation of language models. Okay. That being said, I would like to start talking a little bit about use cases. How are large language models being deployed in the language services industry, and what impact do they have on the competitive landscape? First of all, what do you need to know? What is the true power of large language models compared to other types of language models? It's twofold. First of all, large language models have the ability to learn from context, a lot of context. You can give a source text to your large language model. It can read it, it can analyze it, and it can understand it. You can give legacy translations, old translations to a large language model, same thing. It will read it, understand it, analyze it. You can give style guides with very specific instructions to your model. You can give glossaries with terminology to your model. You can provide examples of what kind of output you expect from the model. both in terms of content and in terms of formatting, etc., and so on. The context windows are typically very, very large with large language models. That's number one. Number two, and this is more intriguing, this is where things start to get scary. LLMs are capable of respecting human instructions. If you tell a large language model to produce a translation of exactly 100 words, chances are you will get 100 words in certain occasions. If you ask a large language model to produce a translation in the style of children, so children target audience, it will do it in a very childish way. I have a very basic example, a very stupid example even, but it beautifully illustrates what I'm trying to say. My prompt here is, write a sonnet about machine translation in Snoop Dogg style. I have three very specific instructions. I want a sonnet, I want it to be about machine translation, and I want it to be in Snoop Dogg style. So after introducing this prompt in ChatGPT, 0.2 seconds later, I get this. Yo, get around, I got a tale to spin. About machines that turn languages to kin. Translation game, it's all the new wave. Snoop Dogg style, let me drop it, behave. From English to Spanish, French to Chinese, those AI translators aim to please. They break down barriers whilst they erase, bringing the world together, tight embrace. Linguistic acrobatics they display, switching tongues like it's just another day. Slang and jargon ain't no trouble for these. Snoop Dogg vibes breezing through with ease. Machine translation, shaking up the scene, uniting cultures, living the dream. You know what I mean. Let me circle back to my instructions, right? Sonnet, machine translation, Snoop Dogg style. I'm not an expert in poetry, but I can tell you that this is a technically perfect sonnet. Is it about machine translation? It definitely is about machine translation. Is it in Snoop Dogg style? You can argue about that, but I would not have done a better job myself. Again, this is a stupid example, but it beautifully illustrates the kind of thing you can do with large language models. And it also gives an idea already of what kind of applications we can do with them or deploy with them in the language services industry. Okay, that being said, based on recent events in the industry, based on what certain companies have been doing and building and releasing, it seems fair, it seems appropriate to say that machine translation is the first discipline that will be completely revamped, completely reshaped by LLMs. And I have a couple of arguments to prove this statement. First of all, when we look at the machine translation market and the customized machine translation market, there is very high interest in adaptive machine translation, the kind of machine translation that automatically learns from your post-editing corrections. But despite the fact that the strength of adaptive machine translation is generally acknowledged, there's not a big market for it. There's only a couple of key players in the market, and lately, amid the rise of large language models, there's not too much activity anymore in the adaptive machine translation space. Another argument, machine translation model training. So training a machine translation model on your own translation data, bilingual data, has become a very, very obsolete practice. It's expensive, it's time consuming. You need to collect data, you need to check the data, you need to clean the data, you need to import your data set to the model, pray for the best. And what happens if the output still isn't what you expected it to be? Are you going to repeat the entire process of collecting the data and checking it and running this very cumbersome training process? You won't be happy if you have to do that, which is why I'm telling you already that the practice of training machine translation models on translation memory data is eventually going to die in favor of large language models. As a matter of fact, we are already witnessing the rise of large language models fine-tuned for translation. For example, DeepL, a company I guess you all know. They're growing, they're raising a lot of money, and a couple of weeks ago, they announced the release of their very own next generation large language model for translation purposes. And of course, in their big press release, they claim that they're beating everyone else on the market. They're producing better translations than GPT-4, than Google, than Microsoft, than basically anyone on the machine translation market. Another example, IBM. Last year, they announced that they were going to pull the plug from their own machine translation program. They had their own machine translation engines, Watson machine translation engines. They pulled the plug, they sunset all of their efforts, and they advised users of their cloud services, IBM Watson, to use only large language models for translation purposes. That is a very strong statement, according to me. What are other companies doing? For example, Babel, a very big language service provider here in Europe, they have released their own LLM for translation called Tower, trained on Llama 2. Pangianic, another language service provider based in Spain, they released their own LLM, Echo. RWS, one of the biggest translation services providers on this planet. They also released their own large language model. Same thing with Translated. LSP based in Italy, they released their own large language model called Lara. What is the main conclusion of this slide? What do these four companies have in common? They are all language service providers. And this is a very important trend. Apparently, training models and releasing models as products is not reserved for language technology providers anymore. It's not just reserved for translation management system providers anymore. The LSPs are also entering the technology space. So a lot is happening. What is the impact on the competitive landscape? A lot is happening on the competitive landscape. What have I identified? First of all, the requirements to fine-tune a large language model are lower compared to neural machine translation. You don't need millions of translation units to train a model. With less data, you can do more. Second, a data set to train a large language model consists of input-output pairs, where you can basically tell what the input is going to look like and what output you expect. Designed to update the model weights, which is easier to control and easier to monitor compared to neural machine translation models, where you basically have to pray for the best when you train an engine. Other things, a fine-tuned model can be further customized through advanced prompting techniques, through retrieval augmented generation. A fine-tuned model, this is also important, can perform additional tasks beyond translation. It's not just translation. Those models can also do automated post-editing, QA, terminology extraction, you name it. They'll be able to do it. So more important observations, fine-tuning models is no longer limited to specialized companies, which I've already mentioned. LSPs are entering the tech space as well. TMS, translation management systems, are no longer the one and only platform where language models and machine translation models are being deployed. And finally, the large open source community for large language models offers a very interesting playground for developers and engineers like myself. And it also strengthens the competitive edge that we're having in our industry right now. Then I would like to add one more use case besides machine translation, which is a very good one for large language models. It's QA and LQA. You are all translation professionals, or at least language professionals, and I guess that if you've ever done a QA check in your CAD tool, in your TMS, you might have noticed that it's a very cumbersome thing to do. What are the problems with QA? QA checks, they produce high amounts of false positives and false negatives, hundreds, perhaps thousands in a big project. You need to fight your way through those false positives to hopefully find one genuine mistake whose impact would be very, very low if it were left unidentified. Second, QA checks are not context-aware. They're customizable to a certain extent only. And the biggest problem, the algorithm of QA, whenever there's a dot in the source, I also need to have a dot in the target. It hasn't changed in 20 years, right? That's a lot of time, and we need to do something about that. The thing with LQA, linguistic quality assurance is slightly different. The process works, it's beautifully standardized, but it's a completely human process, which is on the one hand time consuming, and on the other hand, we must acknowledge that human evaluation is not always entirely unbiased either. So that's also a potential problem. The thing that I want to add here is that I mentioned that LQA is beautifully standardized. I don't think we should stay too much in our comfort zone with our standards. I think that if we want to make good use of AI, we need to think out of the box and move away from our standards. That's something that I really want to add to this slide. The last slide that I will be discussing, why is it so interesting to run QA checks with large language models? There are so many opportunities to repurpose the whole discipline of QA. First of all, when you use a large language model to do so, you can define what exactly needs to be checked. What is troublesome? What do I want to identify in my translations? Second, you can determine the evaluation criteria. When is something an error? When is it not an error? And you can provide context, a lot of context if you like. Third, you can also specify the required output format. What do you want a model to give you? A quality evaluation, a quality score, high or low, a pass versus fail indication. Pass, this is good. Fail, this is not good. An automated correction, right? Because if you can prompt a model to identify an error, you can also prompt it to fix the error for you, or a combination, perhaps. The sky is the limit. Everything is possible. And the conclusion here is that we have a lot of opportunities on the table to build new use cases and repurpose existing use cases. That being said, I would like to thank you, and I think we can now move on to the next part of the event.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ulrich, for sharing. I think it was very insightful. It's true that in the beginning, when you were sharing the binary information 0, 1, I was a bit in the air, but thank God you came back to the realms of humans. So basically, some of the things I believe many of those who are here, we have business owners, we have consultants, we have translators, we have interpreters, and we have localization experts who are part of us today. And some of the questions that many of them will be interested to know is, how can I use AI, not AI, like large language model, how can it contribute to enhance my productivity, my accuracy, or service delivery? So as a user of these tools, what are some of the ways that you have, been, putting that into practice, into your work? Or how are other organizations doing that, or industries?
Well, there are many use cases, and the nice thing about the large language models is that you can build the use cases yourself, right? So what does that mean? If you have a specific problem within your organization, if something doesn't work properly, if something takes too much time, you can basically have a look at what a large language model has to offer, and perhaps it can provide a solution to you. But I will give you a couple of examples, and I think the best example was the one that I last shared in the presentation. It's QA. QA is a typical example of something that simply doesn't work anymore in our industry. The practice is very obsolete, it's time consuming, it's not waterproof, and I think AI does a much better job there. Many technology providers are already releasing AI-driven QA features. So that is a very good example of a practical application, a practical innovation that has been deployed using large language models. Another thing is circling back to machine translation. If you've ever worked with machine translation, and I guess you've all done so, machine translation post-editing, you might have noticed that sometimes you need to edit the same thing over and over and over again, right? Because machine translation, it's not perfect. It's good, but it will produce translations out of context. It will not always capture the terminology, etc., and so on. So automated post-editing, that is a use case that I'm using a lot myself, by the way, in my organization, in my daily work. So what do? We do machine translation. we make a list of things that we know are going to come out bad of the machine translation, certain terms, stylistic errors, whatever goes wrong. We turn them into a prompt, and then we run an integration where the machine translations are automatically post-edited by the large language model. It will not produce perfect translation. That's not the goal either, but it will take your machine translations and it will make them 10, 15, 20, 25% better than they were prior to the automated post-editing, which allows the linguist to really focus on signing off the content, validating it, and not having to waste time on correcting the same error over and over and over again. So I would say QA, that's a good one. Automated post-editing, that's another one, which I particularly like at this point in time.
Okay, thank you so much. So QA and the post-editing elements as you have indicated. Now, let's imagine a scenario where someone is a business owner and he is envisaging to tap into the possibilities of LLM to minimize the cost of translating documents through language service providers. You presented some of the LLM database, which were like LLM solutions were existing. Some of you saw some of them by AWS, Eco, and the rest. Are they open to businesses already, especially those based in Africa, and how affordable it is when compared to reaching out to, a freelance or a professional translator or interpreter?
Well, I have a hard time when people say that they want to deploy AI purely to cut costs. I don't like that, right? Especially when a buyer reaches out to a language service provider. Look, I want you to use AI because I want to spend less. That's actually a very uncomfortable situation. Why? Because you as a language service provider, first of all, you have to invest in the technology. If you're serious about doing business with it, you have to invest in the skills, in the knowledge, and you have to build some kind of product around it, right? So you will have invested a lot of money and time and effort into it to then charge your services at lower rates. That is a very big paradox, and I don't like that. However, what those companies from the slides are doing, RWS and Translated and Unbabel and Pangenic and other companies, they are basically trying to build solutions for companies who are interested in using AI just because they have a lot of content, very high volumes that need to be processed at very soon deadlines, etc., and so on. They basically want to build a ready-made solution for those companies to meet those needs. High volumes, very tight deadlines, that's where a large language model can come into play. But when it comes to purely cutting the cost, I don't like that. And there's a very huge paradox when it comes to asking that question to your large or to your language service provider. So that's my opinion when it comes to cutting costs when deploying large language models.
Okay, thank you so much. And we have one question here, also connected to African languages. A lot of conversation have been going on recently since the launch of the first LLM for African languages. So as a professional in the industry, what are some of the possibilities? How do you see LLM contributing to advance, the visibility or use of African languages?
That's a very good question. And I actually hope to learn something from this question because you are the experts when it comes to African languages. I'm the expert when it comes to the technology. So maybe we can come to an answer together here. I think the opportunities here are that this technology, large language models, it's relatively new to our industry. And it brings use cases that we haven't explored before. It brings customization techniques that we haven't explored before, right? And I think it's very important for the African region to understand what exactly those large language models do and how you can make them better, right? I've promoted a couple of customization techniques in the slides. You can provide context to the model. You can give very specific instructions to the model. You can fine-tune a model based on your own data. You can apply other techniques like retrieval augmented generation, where a large language model looks into your own content, your own documents, and uses them for context. I think it's very important for you as the African region to know that, and to realize that there are many use cases for you where you can deploy it for your own languages and for your own linguistic richness. What does that look like? I don't know, right? It could be automated translation. It could be automated post-editing. It could be QA, right? And those are the three use cases that I have been mentioning thus far. But there are other use cases. You could, for example, use large language models to identify biased content in your own languages, or harmful content in your own languages, which is proving or doing a good deed for society, sexual content, that kind of thing. So there are so many, many use cases. And I think if we manage to understand this technology properly, apply very targeted customization techniques, then there are many, many opportunities for you as a region with large language model. What does that look like? I will leave that answer to you, but the technology is new and it opens doors towards many new use cases.
Okay, thank you very much. I believe you are aware of the fact that AI has brought this conversation about some fear or concern about human and technology, some thinking that AI was going to totally eradicate the needs of humans in the work process, and I believe this same concern are also, valid and coming up when it has to do with the language service industry. So from your own perspective, do you see, is there a possible future where a strong development of LLM and AI could minimize or even get to eradicate the need of reaching out to language service providers?
Luckily, I don't think that's going to happen. And we have a bit of history in the language industry when the concept of a translation memory was introduced, end of the 1980s, beginning of the 1990s. We already thought that it was going to take over a lot of work of the human translator. In the end, it proved to be the best translation resource ever thus far. Same thing happened with machine translation. Neural machine translation, big introduction in 2017, DeepL, and we thought that it was going to wash away the human translation profession. It didn't happen. Now we're witnessing a new technology rise, and again, we think that it's going to wash away the human translation profession. I'm very confident that it's not going to happen. What I do believe is that it will change a little bit how a translator works in his daily operations or her daily operations. That's something that I think is going to happen, and there will be more editing work involved for a translator than real human translation from scratch. That does not mean that human translation from scratch is going to disappear, right? There are many companies that still need real, genuine translation. Think about literature. Think about websites, right? Marketing content where the high traffic pages need to be localized properly. Their automated translation is not an option, right? There are many, many cases where it's still crucial to have proper, good, genuine human translation. On the flip side, there are many content types where it's not required to have the best possible translation ever. Some pieces of content simply need to be translated. Think about low traffic pages on a website. It's necessary to have them translated, but if no one reads them, why would you bother spending thousands or even more money on it than required? That's where we should deploy large language models. That's where there's a good use case for large language models. That does not mean that it takes over the work of the human translation. Instead, it does the work where there's no time or no budget for human translators to take care of the translation. So in the end, it basically does the translation. It takes care of the translations that would not be done without AI because there's no time for it, because there's no budget for it. So will the human translator be washed away? No. Will the daily workload of the translator change? I think so.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And now we would like to explore one other aspect, which is connected to the ethical and privacy concern that comes with, large language models. So how do most of those using that, how are they managing those concerns and ensuring that businesses and clients, that their data and any other sensitive information, are preserved as such? How is that managed so far? And have you been aware of any cases of leaking of sensitive information recently concerning this?
Okay, so I'm not really an expert on the matter, but I will share what I know about it. So security and privacy has always been a big concern, always, and also with the rise of machine translation. I remember in 2017, there were huge concerns around using APIs for machine translation. Today, the whole wide world is using machine translation, and they don't seem to be concerned about the potential implications of using their data in those services. So in a way, I find the whole discussion around security and data privacy important, but not always appropriate because of the reason that I just mentioned. But how does it work? There is a rule of thumb when working with technology that says if you use a free service, you will pay with your data. What does that mean? If you make use of ChatGPT and you start throwing all kinds of sensitive information in it, yes, they will take your information, and yes, they will use it to train and retrain their own models. And they're not making a secret out of it. They have it written out in their security policy. If you use the free version of ChatGPT, we will work with your data, right? If you have a paid version of, for example, ChatGPT of another LLM service, then there's also a security policy where it is being written out that if you pay for the service, your data is safe and your data will not be used for any other purposes than the purposes of the user who processes the data in the system. It will not be used for internal training of the models at OpenAI. It will not be used for any other purposes. And those providers also promise that they delete your data like 5 seconds after processing it or something like that. That's what I can tell you theoretically. Does that mean that there's no risk at all? Probably not. And of course, there are cases and industries and verticals, defense, healthcare, finance, where it's very crucial to have like no data leaks at all, zero risk, and those companies would like to probably deploy the solutions on their premises. But other than that, I think it's let's say pretty safe.
Okay, thank you so much. Now, we also would like to look at the issue of collaboration. So far, it has been noted that sometimes there are some bias as to the data that is being used by large language model, in the sense that not much of it includes information, that are culturally accurate, about Africa or other regions which are not properly, represented. And that's one of the reasons why, Alibaba or Jack Ma in China, they develop their own, LLM model, which they are also using. And that's also one of the reasons why AI also developed their own, large language model. But how do you see the future in terms of collaboration between the technology developers, the linguists, and the communities where those languages are being spoken? What scenario, of collaboration have you seen working to ensure that there is a minimization of bias and an accurate representation of the realities?
Honestly, I don't think there's going to be much collaboration between the LLM providers and linguists or our industry. I think what we need to do is collaborate within our industry. I think that's what we need to do. To come back quickly to the concept of bias, I know that's a very hot topic and there's a lot of talk about it. What you need to know about language models and neural networks is that they only reflect what they have seen in the training data, right? So if a model fails to provide culturally relevant info, if a model produces biased information, if a model gets things wrong, it's only because there were leaks or problems or issues in the data that was used to train the model. So basically, those models are a mirror of our society. It has ingested our data, and our data was already biased. That is a big problem. When it comes to collaboration, repeating again that I think what we need to do is collaborate within our industry. And I will give you one example of where we could collaborate between engineers and buyers and providers and linguists. I think, for example, that linguists are the best prompt engineers on the planet. Why? Because they work with the content, they know what's wrong with the data, they know what needs to be done with the data in order to improve it, and they can probably write the best possible instructions for it. So that's something that I believe that should happen. We should look at linguists as prompt engineers and not necessarily the technical people like me, not necessarily the buyers who have very high hopes or very high expectations of cutting costs. No, I think the linguists should be the primary prompt engineers when deploying language models in our industry.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And finally, what are the opportunities? That's my last question before we open the floor to participants. What are the opportunities that you have noticed in the language service industry which still remain on tap or not, sufficiently explored by freelancers and language service providers? Some existing opportunities, some existing tools, some existing platforms which are quite relevant, but which still seems not to be, fully leveraged by professionals?
That's a good question and also a difficult one. I think when it comes to like real opportunities, I think I've shared them already in today's presentation, and I'm not going to repeat them. We've talked about them enough. What I do want to say when it comes to this question, it may be a little bit of an empty answer. I'm sorry, but I truly believe that large language models have the opportunity to revolutionize everything that we are doing in localization workflows, from data exchange to workflow management, smart workflow management, to automated translation, to quality assurance, to linguist assignment, etc., and so on. So there is so many space for new opportunities. There are so many places and fields and disciplines that are unexplored. So the answer to your question is there are a lot of opportunities and there is a lot of unexplored territory for us as an industry. And we will find out in the coming months and years what those unexplored territories are. At this point, I can only repeat what I've said already in the presentation: automated translation, automated post-editing, QA, terminology extraction, identification of harmful content, biased content, that kind of thing. Very good use cases. And prior to the advent of LLMs, it was almost impossible to do those things in a quick and efficient way.
Okay, thank you so much, Yurik, for this marvelous time to exchange with us your rich experience when it has to do with the technology aspect of large language model. We really appreciate. We will now give the floor to participants, those who are here. I believe there is a drive, there is motivation that causes you to register and attend today's event. So we would like to hear from you. What are any other question or consideration that you have for our panelists, Yurik? Thank you. The floor is to any participant who would like to take it. We still have the next 15 minutes to do that and close. Thank you. Go, I see Ngozi. Ngozi, Egunu, do you have a question? Hello? I've seen Ngozi mic open. Does she has a question? Or if that's the case, we can't hear you. Okay, one question just came. I don't know if the challenge is on using Zoom for asking the question. The question is, how do you see LLM impacting the career, of translators and interpreters?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question. And in my introduction, you've said that I'm teaching a lot and giving guest lectures, so I know a little bit what's happening in the universities, and I can tell you that a lot is changing there, right? So back in the days, if you were studying translation studies or interpreting, it was very much focused on the whole linguistic aspect of executing translation work. Everything was centered around the linguistic aspect of it, and the focus on technology was very, very limited. At least that was my experience back in the days when I was still studying to become a translator. Now, today, I'm teaching at a couple of universities. I'm giving this kind of presentation at universities, and I'm always amazed by how the programs are changing, right? So back in the days, a technology course was limited to an introduction to Trado Studio, and that was it. Today, I'm seeing that students are exploring the machine translation market, and they're experiencing and experimenting with different machine translation providers. They are learning different translation management systems, not just Trado Studio. They are doing introductory courses to Python, for example, small development. They are building their own translation-specific neural network as part of a research paper, etc., and so on. So I am identifying a very interesting shift there, where in the academic part, where in the academic studies, there is already a very big focus on technology. And I think that's good, because a large part of what we do as language service providers is around technology. So it is changing. The answer is yes. The career of translators who wish to graduate as translators, yes, it's changing, and they will have different capabilities and different expertises when they graduate compared to 20 years ago. That's for sure.
Okay, thank you so much. Another question that came in is at the level of learning and training opportunities for someone based in Africa as a freelancer, how can you, or how and where do you go to learn about AI for the translation or language service industry? What are the learning opportunities, basically? I think that's the question. What are the learning opportunities which you are aware of, for anyone who would like to learn more about, maybe computational linguistics, AI for linguists? Where do we go from
Yeah,
Africa? See, those opportunities are not really available on the African market.
that's a good question. I cannot judge about the African market, of course, but what I do feel is I'm a little bit disappointed when it comes to learning and development opportunities. When I see courses being published, courses that you can follow online, I'm always disappointed, first about the quantity of the courses that are being made available, second about the quality of the courses. It's always around prompt engineering, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that if you're serious about learning something about AI, you would need to have, for example, the slides that I shared in the beginning. Even though they're super technical, you need to know it, right? You need to know how it works. So what is the best piece of advice I can give you here? Network. You need to be present. You need to be there on social media. You need to be LinkedIn. You need to be on LinkedIn. You need to follow companies, right? The 4 companies that I gave in the slide, Unbabel, Pangeanic, RWS, even though they might be your competitors, you need to follow them, right? And just by being present on social media, by being present maybe at conferences, I don't know to which extent it's covered at conferences in Africa, but go outside, learn, talk, connect with me on LinkedIn, whatever. And just by being there, by being present, you will catch more opportunities than by not being present on, for example, social media.
Okay, thank you. And another question that came is, can LLM support the preservation of endangered African languages? How can LLM support the preservation of language endangers? Let's say, not just Africa in general, can they have a contribution when it has to do with, language which are disappearing? If yes, how can they contribute towards that?
Look, there is a big problem when it comes to language models and language technology. It's very much centered around English, right? In the case of ChatGPT, I guess you've all played around with ChatGPT. You should know that 90%, I think it's even more than 90%, 91, 92% of all the training data that has gone into GPT models was English, right? My mother tongue is Dutch. And when I produce content in Dutch with ChatGPT, I'm sometimes amazed by the output. But when I read between the lines, I really identify that it's not very good at all. So is the technology itself good enough to preserve endangered African languages? I'm afraid not. But if you, as local experts, as experts of your culture and experts of those languages, make good use of the technology and do everything I've been discussing in this presentation, provide context, give very good instructions, other customization techniques, there are opportunities to produce more content, for example, in those endangered African languages, or to do something with that content or enhance that content or whatever. I don't know what that use case would look like for you. So the technology itself is technology, and 90% of it is English. The use cases, that's our responsibility as language service professionals, and there we could potentially do something to preserve endangered African languages. How and what? I'm not sure, but when applying and deploying the technology properly, I think there are some opportunities. How powerful they are, I don't know, but some opportunities, yes, I think there will be some.
Okay, so thank you so much for sharing. Then we'll take a question from Rebecca. Rebecca, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Christian, and thank you, Rick, for the wonderful presentation. So I have a question that has actually been on my heart for some time, and since we are talking about LLMs, I feel like it's the appropriate time to ask the question. So I realized that there are some AI platforms that do not actually respond to certain questions. Particularly, there was one on LGBTQ related topics. It doesn't really give responses to the questions I put there. So I was wondering, so given your expertise when it comes to the technicalities of LLMs, I'm curious to know whether these restrictions are due to the lack of data on the subject, or there's probably another reason behind that.
You're actually highlighting one of the big problems with this technology, and there are more problems than that. Hallucinations is another problem. So it gives you something and it doesn't make a lot of sense. And what you should know is that those models are trained to always provide an answer, even if it doesn't make sense at all, right? So if it doesn't know what you are talking about, it will pretend that it knows what you are talking about. And that's actually a very, very dangerous thing. And I'm actually happy that you bring up this subject, because we have been talking about how great those models are, and they are great, but there's also a lot of danger when those models are misused. Bad information, wrong expectations, you name it. And it always comes down to the same thing, right? It comes down to applying or deploying those models properly, giving it good instructions, managing expectations, knowing what you're doing, and then it will be possible to build a use case around it. There's one technique that I would like to highlight, and I think I've mentioned it somewhere in the presentation already. It's retrieval augmented generation. What does that mean? It means that you give your large language model insights, access to your own data, which can be your website, which can be your Google Drive, which can be your offline PDF documents, whatever. It can look into that data and it can digest the data and it can provide answers based on that data only. That's what we need, and that is what's going to become the default when deploying large language models. What is the true power of retrieval augmented generation? If you ask it a question and it knows the answer based on the context, it will give you the answer. In all other circumstances, it will say, sorry, I don't know, I cannot help you. And you will avoid certain issues like producing bad information, false information, hallucinations, etc., and so on. So thank you for bringing that up. There are problems, and the technology itself is not mature yet to work around all of those problems, but solutions are being made, and building those solutions is a practice that is in progress.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Yurik, and we appreciate your availability for this session. We are coming to an end, except there are additional questions from the audience, and we would like to sincerely appreciate the time spent with us sharing about the various opportunities, the various, technicalities around the use of LLM, in the language service industry. Now, we would like to know, do you have any additional words for the audience before we move to the second part of today's meeting, which will be to present other opportunities that are existing to connect and contribute towards, some of the issues that you have highlighted. For example, you share about the need for local professionals to take initiative, and build models that will be relevant for their languages. Kabod has been doing some work around some of these elements, at least the foundation, and the second part will be focused on that. So what are your final words for us before we move on to that? Thank you.
My final words are, thank you very much again for having me. It was a very nice experience to work with people from your region. It was a first experience for me. I really appreciate it. So thanks a lot for that. And I'm happy to give you the floor for the rest of the event.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Yurik. We really appreciate. So we are moving into the second part, where we want to briefly share with our audience some of the existing work that has been done, around the language service industry in connection with localization and large language model. Of course, it's important to realize that if there are opportunities, those opportunities need to have, an economic value, and the economic value is rejoicing to know that the global localization market is expected to be at 56.18 billion by next year, which means that there is a lot that Africa can tap into that. The expansion of AI with LLM, digital and e-learning platform after the post-COVID has made it urgent, to go beyond, in-person program. I think, as Mr. Yurik indicated, now it's possible for anyone to learn. There are some platforms like Translaster, Creative Words, Nimzi, who are having online courses which can enable you as a language professional in Africa to gain some practical and industry relevant expertise. We also have platforms such as this event that we are having, Kabod Language Service Talk, KLS Talk, which are dedicated to language service professional and business professional who are interested in, language services. And we also have the localization podcast. These are opportunities that are there for you to grow your skills, for you to grow yourself and be more effective in the global market that we are into. And in 2022, Kabod, together with other LSP, we put together what we call ALCA. ALCA, which is known as the Association of Language Company in Africa. Association of Language Company in Africa. So basically, if you are an LSP, a language service provider here who is registered, and you would like to be part of a community of other LSP on the continent, we invite you to join the first continental platform of language service provider. The second initiative we have in place is the African Language Conference, which is also organized by Kabod Language Service with Bolingo and Avista. It's a platform basically where you can go and share any discovery, any work that you are doing in connection with language technology, in connection with language preservation. We also have put in place a network known as ALAT. ALAT stands for, the Network of African Language Translators and Teachers. It's a network that Kabod established a year and a half ago. And today we have more than 2,000 language professionals who are members of that network. It's a LinkedIn network which is existing and where you can go and find opportunities, blogs, articles, or resources that can help you advance towards your career. So basically, a lot of opportunities are existing, and we sincerely believe that everybody can tap into that. Currently, other initiative which we are having in place is the technology is a podcast, a podcast on language technology in Africa, which you can take advantage. At the level of research and innovation, we have Afrolingual. I'll be sharing a view of the magazine very soon. So if you are here as either a business owner, either a translator, either an interpreter, and you have ever wished to share your experiences, you have ever wished to know how are other African translators doing their work, what are the challenges that they are facing, what are the tools that you can leverage on to improve your work, all of those questions that are related to the language service industry, you can find answers through Afrolingual magazine. The magazine will be launched in October. It's already ready, and we invite you when it is launched to go through it and to share the word of mouth to as many people as possible. A third pillar essential to build an industry is access to market and trade, and that's the reason why we have the MATI platform. And currently, we are developing an online platform which will be supported by an app similar to Proofs or those who are familiar with Upwork, but a platform that will be exclusively dedicated to African language professional. African language professional is going to be a platform where if you are an LSP or a freelancer, you can go there, advertise yourself, get market from business and other people who are interested in working with African language professional. So all of these initiatives are some of those which were spearheaded by Kabod Language Service, because our mission is to build the language service industry in Africa. We strongly believe that there is a lot that could be done. If we come together, there is so much more that could be done. And we are building this community of practice, building this platform, creating these learning opportunities and events to enable all of us to actively participate, in this ecosystem. Recently, in August, we had the first conference of language service providers on the continent, the ALCA annual conference, in which many LSP were present and a lot of interesting initiatives are going on. If you would like to join the ALAT platform, the link is in the group. It's open to all linguists, localization expert. Today we have exactly 1,875 members. You can find networking events, industry update, and skill sharing workshop. If you would also like to join the Association of Language Company in Africa, you can join us. It's open, and just reach out to us and we'll show you how to go about it. This is an idea of the magazine I was referring to, the Afrolingual magazine. It's going to be published very soon in October. This is the first page cover. to give you an idea of what it consists of. So basically, these are some of the opportunities that are available for you. So far, at the level of Kabod, we are also increasing partnership with academia. So if you are here and you work within a university with a language school, and you would like to enter or do more with language service provider, we are open to that. Why is that important? Because, for example, as Mr. Yurik has indicated, there are not enough of courses that are, specialized on the language service industry. I think Nimzi Insight, Translate Star, and Creative Words are those I know who are having content or training content for language professional. But there is so much more that can be done. There is so much more that can be done. The Afrolingual media will be there to support anyone also who would like to gain more visibility as a language service provider. And if you would like to advertise the work that you do not hesitate. Reach out to us. We are here for you. We are here to build, and we are open to collaborate with anybody who is interested in building the language service industry on the continent. Join any of our platform, contribute, share your ideas, talk, but together, let's build the industry. And we hope that this event has been a blessing unto you. We will reach out to you for another event next month that will focus on the language learning market, right? In Africa, there are many initiatives here and there to learn about languages, but what is the potential of the industry in terms of language learning? How do we make the industry more robust? For example, if you come to Accra in Ghana, you realize that even though you're in Ghana, to easily find centers where you can learn the local, one of the major local language, which is Twi, is quite hard. To find dictionary in Twi is difficult, or sometimes not even possible. How do we structure the language learning market? How do we make things better? How do we give value to African languages and tap the economic potential that they can offer, knowing that it's impossible to grow effectively without developing our local languages, and it's up to us to put in place the systems, the strategy that are needed to make that possible. Kabod is fully engaged into that, and we are open to collaborate with anyone who is also looking in that same direction. So on this base, we are close with this second part. We want to say asante, as we say in Ghana. Medase also, gracious, merci in French, and we look forward to connecting more with you. Check in the chat group. You will see the links to join any of our platforms, and we'll be glad to partner and collaborate with you. Thank you so much for making time, and we look forward to engaging with each one of you at our next event. Is anyone having a question before we close? Any question? Any concern from this second part of the presentation? If that's the case, you can raise your hand or open your mic and share. We still have 7 minutes before we close, because the event is 90 minutes. Any question? Okay, Ngozi, thank you.
My hand is up, please.
Yes, please, go on, please.
Okay. Let me start. Good evening to all. Let me start by introducing myself. My name is Johannes Okechukwu. So I'm sorry that I joined the meeting late. So I didn't have maybe most of the informations that were shared in the meeting. So as it stands now, I just want to ask if you, Mr. Christian Elonge, you can help me with let's say, some links that one can do voluntary service in terms of translation, because I am, let's say, doing translation in 2 languages, and I'm looking for where I can do voluntary service in translation from maybe French to English or English to French, vice versa. So I don't know if you can help me with some link. So that's my question.
Yes, please. Kabod has a volunteering program, you know, for professional like translator and interpreters. So please kindly drop your email. The team will reach out to you and we'll take it further.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other question? Any other concern? Were all your questions, your expectation addressed? We still have 5 minutes. Okay, no question. Okay, then on this base, we would like, let me check if there is no question. Okay. So no additional question. Okay, so on this base, we would like to thank you all for making time for this. We really appreciate your time. And I will give the floor to my colleague, Rebecca, who has been supervising the organizing of this edition. Thank you so much for the wonderful work done. And also the tech team made up of Mr. Jerry Deswasi and Aris Fosso, who are managing everything in the background. We really appreciate the effort, you know, the coordination and the work that went in to make this possible. So, Miss Rebecca, please, you have the floor, you know, to close for today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Christian. I'm sure we've all enjoyed today's session. I'm sure we all have. So how are you feeling now? Before we leave, you know we always want to have a sense of how you are feeling. Are you feeling refreshed? You could drop an emoji in the chat box before you leave. Don't leave without dropping that emoji. How are you feeling? Are you refreshed? You could even leave, an adjective to describe how you are feeling. How was the session? Was it insightful? Was it engaging? How did you feel? Please drop something in the chat box before you leave. Drop something in the chat box. I'm waiting to see all those comments before we end the session. Okay. Ngozi says it was engaging. Yes, it indeed was. We were able to chat with Yurik. Please, the others, let's kindly drop something. You can drop an emoji or even, yes, very insightful. Thank you so much, Prince. Thank you. Thank you. Awesome. That's interesting. Thank you, Eugene. Okay. I can see Asongos is dancing. I'm sure we are all refreshed. We've all learned a lot. Personally, I've learned a lot from this session. You think that LLMs are so technical, but Yurik was able to calm down to teach us what exactly it is when it comes to LLMs. So thank you all so much for joining today's conversation. So we've left some information in the chat box. Just as Christian mentioned, there's a volunteering program ongoing. So if you want to join, I've left my email in the chat box. You can reach out to me. And also, considering the Afrolinguals magazine, yes, the inaugural issue is coming out, but we also have the second edition to prepare for, and we are counting on you to actually contribute to it. And I'm sure you've seen my post in the Mati platform. So kindly reach out to me if you want to contribute. If you don't want to even write, contact me. I'm willing to write for you. I just want you to speak so that I can write for you. Yeah, so we also have a recording of this session. So in case you want to, you want the recording so that you can replay to be able to get an idea of what happened, you can reach out to me as well on the Mati platform. You can reach out to me on the Mati platform or via emails. So thank you all for joining today's discussion. It's been nice having you all.
Rebecca, if you allow, we can also share the link of the YouTube channel for those who would like to see previous events that we have organized. So we are sharing that now. Okay. So I'm sharing that in the chat. You can subscribe to our YouTube page so that when the recording is available, you can easily have access to it. Yes, I see a comment from Chantal. Chantal, welcome. Always nice to have you around. Yeah, insightful. It seems just one session is not enough to speak about everything and address all questions we may have. Looking forward to more. Yes. Yes. Okay, Latifu, can the presenter share with us their presentation? Mr. Yurik, will that be possible?
Yeah, that's no problem at all.
Okay, beautiful. So, Miss Latifu, that's possible. So we will make that available, and yeah. So thank you all for making time. We thank you for your great insight, Mr. Yurik, and for the participant for your patience and engagement during this session. So we are going to take a group picture and call it a day. So if you can put your camera on briefly, we will really appreciate. It's true, some have left already, but for those of you who are still around, if you can kindly put okay. The tech team, are you able of taking a nice Mr. Jerry or Aris? Can you
I
take
think
it?
you're taking the picture.
Please, MD, can you stop sharing your screen?
Oh, okay.
Because we can't really take the picture.
Stop share. Okay, I'll stop.
Nice to meet you, Chantal. Now I can see all your faces.
And for those of you who have ideas of topics you would like us to to discuss about, don't hesitate to reach out and to inform us, and we'll be glad to factor that. As indicated, the topic of October will be the language learning market. Why are we not having apps like Duolingo specialized on African language only, where you can go and learn Swahili, you can go and learn, Chui easily, So we'll discuss about that and the opportunities that are also available in the industry. And Kabod is currently working on these things. So if any of you is interested, don't hesitate to reach out. Okay, so a good smile for the picture.